Do not forget, Evelina, that you are not attending the Ashcombe gathering as a daughter of this house. You are attending because someone must remind society why you were never meant to represent us. The words fell across the drawing room like a blade. Evelina Ashcombe stood beside the marble fireplace, with her gloved hands folded tightly before her, while Lady Corisande Ashcombe adjusted the pearl necklace at her own throat and examined her stepdaughter's reflection in the tall mirror. The woman's expression held the same careful displeasure she had worn for years, the expression of someone inspecting an object that had failed to become valuable. Outside the windows of Ashcombe Manor, winter rain traced silver lines down the glass. Inside the room was warm with candles and the glow of the fire, yet Evelina felt the familiar cold that had followed her since the day her father died. Tonight was meant to be one of the most important gatherings of the season. Nobles from across the county would arrive at Ashcombe Manor before travelling to London. The family's reputation would be displayed beneath chandeliers, beside polished silver, and among voices that carried influence far beyond the walls of the estate. Lady Corisande intended for Evelina to be part of that display, but not as an equal, as a warning. You will wear that gown. Lady Corisande continued, pointing toward the simple grey dress laid across the chair, not the blue one your father purchased before his death. That colour suggests confidence, and confidence is a dangerous quality in a woman who has so little position. Evelina looked at the gown. It was not torn. It was not unsuitable, but compared with the rich fabrics worn by the other ladies of the house, it appeared deliberately chosen to make her disappear. You asked me to attend the gathering, Evelina said quietly. I assumed that meant you wished me to behave with dignity. Lady Corisande's lips curved slightly. Dignity. The word carried enough amusement to make the two young maids standing near the doorway lower their eyes. Your father left you with a name, Evelina, nothing more. You have no husband, no fortune of your own, and no claim that would interest anyone in this room. Do not mistake kindness for acceptance. One of the maids gave a small laugh before quickly covering her mouth. The sound was brief, but it was enough. Evelina felt the humiliation settle over her more heavily than the rain outside. She had heard cruel words before. She had heard them after her father's funeral, when Lady Corisande had quietly moved her belongings from the family wing to the smaller rooms near the servants' corridor. She had heard them when requests for new gowns were denied, when invitations disappeared, when visitors were told that Evelina preferred solitude. But this was different. This was deliberate. Lady Corisande wanted witnesses. She wanted the household to understand that Evelina Ashcombe had no place among them. You will attend the gathering, Lady Corisande said, lifting a letter from the table. You will stand when spoken to. You will not discuss family matters. And if anyone asks about your future, you will politely admit that you are grateful for the generosity of this house. Evelina looked at the sealed letter. The Ashcombe crest was pressed into the wax, a crest that had once belonged to her father, a crest that now felt like it belonged to someone else. And if I refuse, the room became silent, not because Evelina had raised her voice, because she had never answered before. Lady Corisande slowly turned toward her. You would refuse. For the first time that evening, Evelina saw something beyond irritation in her stepmother's eyes. Concern. Only for a moment. Then it vanished. You should be careful, Lady Corisande said. A woman without protection cannot afford pride. Evelina lowered her gaze, but not from surrender. She had learned something during the 3 years since her father's death. Silence was often mistaken for weakness, and those who believed they had already won were usually the least careful with their secrets. That night, beneath the judgment of Ashcombe Manor's guests, Lady Corisande would succeed in making Evelina appear insignificant. But she would not know that she had placed the one person who remembered the truth in the very room where the truth would eventually destroy her. Before we return to how Evelina Ashcombe became the woman standing alone against her family, tell us where you are listening from today. If you enjoy stories of courage, justice, and hidden truths rising against powerful families, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss another story. Your support helps this channel continue sharing forgotten lives and remarkable journeys from the past. And now let us return to the beginning, to the years when Evelina still believed that loyalty could protect her. Evelina had not always been a forgotten daughter inside Ashcombe Manor. Before Lady Corisande entered her father's life, she had been raised with gentleness. Her mother had died when Evelina was young, but her father, Edmund Ashcombe, had always reminded her that intelligence was not a quality reserved only for sons. He had allowed her to read in the library to understand the estate accounts, and to walk through the gardens with the estate manager while learning how the land was cared for. She had known every field boundary, every tenant family, every season when the harvest succeeded or failed. But after her father's illness, everything changed. Lady Corisande arrived as a widow with a polished reputation and a talent for making every conversation appear reasonable. She did not openly attack Evelina. She did something more effective. She slowly convinced everyone that Evelina was impractical, too emotional, too attached to memories, too inexperienced to understand the responsibilities of a great estate. After Edmund Ashcombe died, the household followed the woman who appeared strongest, not the daughter who had lost her father. The first change came with the estate accounts. Evelina noticed that several payments connected to Ashcombe lands had changed. Small amounts at first, nothing dramatic. A missing repair expense here. A delayed tenant payment there. When she asked about it, Lady Corisande smiled. "My dear, grief has made you suspicious." That sentence ended many conversations, because society found it easier to believe that a grieving young woman was confused than to question a respectable widow managing a noble household. Evelina stopped arguing, but she did not stop observing. In the library behind a locked cabinet that had belonged to her father, she found a small leather box containing old papers. The key had been hidden beneath a loose piece of wood near the fireplace, a place only someone who knew her father's habits would recognize. Inside was not money, not jewels, only documents, one letter, one partial account sheet, and a name written in her father's handwriting. Evelina read the name twice, then a third time, because she understood immediately that whatever Lady Corisande had been hiding, it was connected to someone who had never truly left Ashcombe Manor. She closed the box and returned it exactly as she found it. For the first time in her life, Evelina made a decision without asking permission. She would not confront her stepmother. Not yet. She would learn, and she would survive. The following weeks became a quiet battle. While Lady Corisande prepared the household for the winter gathering, Evelina began visiting the village market and speaking with people who had worked on the estate for decades. There, away from the polished floors and careful smiles of Ashcombe Manor, she discovered something unexpected. People remembered. The old gardener remembered her father discussing changes to the estate. The former stable boy remembered seeing unfamiliar visitors carrying papers late at night. And Mrs. Bell, an elderly housekeeper who had served the Ashcombe family before Lady Corisande arrived, remembered something even more important. "Your father trusted very few people with his private affairs," Mrs. Bell whispered one evening in the servants' kitchen, "but he trusted you." Evelina looked at the older woman. "Why did you never tell me?" Mrs. Bell lowered her eyes. "Because I was afraid." The answer was simple and painful. Fear had protected many secrets inside Ashcombe Manor. Fear had kept servants silent. Fear had kept family members obedient. Fear had allowed injustice to appear respectable. But now for the first time someone had spoken. And Evelina realized that the truth had not disappeared. It had only been waiting for someone brave enough to carry it. The night of the gathering arrived with heavy rain and icy winds. Carriages rolled through the gates, their lamps glowing against the darkness. Guests entered Ashcombe Manor wearing velvet coats, silk gowns and expressions, carefully trained for society. Lady Corisande welcomed them as though she owned not only the house, but every story told inside it. Evelina entered later, exactly as instructed, quietly, alone, wearing the grey gown chosen to diminish her. The room noticed. Some guests looked away. Some smiled. Some whispered. Then the Duke of Valancrest arrived. And when his eyes moved across the crowded room, he did not see the poorly dressed young woman Lady Corisande hoped everyone would ignore. He saw the only person standing there who looked as though she had nothing left to gain by lying. And before the evening ended, the Duke would say something that would change how every person in Ashcombe Manor looked at Evelina forever. Because none of them knew that the woman they had been invited to pity was carrying the one truth capable of bringing an entire family to its knees. The first person to notice the change in the room was not Evelina, it was Lady Corisande. The Duke of Valancrest had entered Ashcombe Manor with the calm confidence of a man who had spent his entire life being observed, yet had never needed to seek approval from those watching him. His dark coat carried no unnecessary decoration, his manner was restrained, and his expression revealed little. But when his gaze settled on Evelina, it remained there longer than anyone expected. Lady Corisande noticed, and she disliked it immediately. "My lord," she said, stepping forward with a graceful smile, "your arrival honors our family." The Duke bowed politely. "Lady Corisande, your hospitality is always spoken of highly." The compliment was correct, but it was empty. Lady Corisande understood the difference. She quickly turned toward the room where several guests had already begun watching the exchange. "My stepdaughter Evelina has insisted on attending this evening," she said lightly, "though I fear she is still adjusting to society after her years of mourning." The sentence was carefully designed. Not an accusation, not openly cruel, something worse. A suggestion. Several guests looked toward Evelina with renewed curiosity. Evelina felt the familiar pressure of being examined. She knew that expression. The polite interest that was not kindness. The careful silence before gossip. The belief that a woman without wealth or a husband must have some hidden failure that explained her position. The Duke looked at Lady Corisande. "Has she?" Lady Corisande smiled. "She has always been a sensitive girl." Evelina almost answered. Almost. But she remembered the lesson she had learned. Those who controlled the conversation often controlled the truth. So she remained silent. The musicians began playing. Guests moved toward the center of the ballroom, where the polished floor reflected candlelight. The room filled with conversation, laughter, and the soft movement of expensive fabric. Evelina stood near the edge, exactly where Lady Corisande intended her to remain. The Duke, however, did not move away. "You appear rather separated from the celebration," he said. Evelina turned. "My position in the room seems to have already been decided." A faint change crossed his expression. Not amusement, recognition. "You say that as though you disagree. I believe a person's position should be earned by their actions, not assigned by someone else's opinion." The Duke studied her carefully. That is a surprisingly firm statement from someone who has been accused of being too quiet. Evelina looked toward Lady Corisande. "She has always preferred me quiet. And why? Because quiet people are easier to misunderstand." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them the ballroom continued. A glass touched a silver tray. A gentleman laughed too loudly. A lady whispered behind her fan. But between Evelina and the Duke there was only silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that suggested two people had noticed something important. Then came the moment Lady Corisande had planned. A gentleman named Lord Harrington approached with two other guests beside him. He was older, wealthy, and known for enjoying conversations where someone else became the subject. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, "how fortunate that you have joined us." Evelina inclined her head. "Lord Harrington, I was wondering," he continued, "whether you have decided what your future will be." The question was harmless in appearance. Everyone knew it was not. Evelina kept her expression calm. "I have considered several possibilities." "Indeed," Lord Harrington smiled. "Without a fortune, marriage prospects, or direct control of Ashcombe affairs, I imagine your choices are limited." A few people nearby stopped speaking. Lady Corisande watched, waiting. She wanted Evelina to react. She wanted anger, tears, anything that could be used as proof that she was unstable. Instead, Evelina simply said, "Perhaps. But limited choices do not prevent a person from making an honest one." The answer was quiet, and that made it stronger. Lord Harrington laughed. A noble thought. The Duke stepped forward. "Is honesty now considered a weakness?" The laughter stopped. The question had not been spoken loudly. It did not need to be. Everyone heard it. Lord Harrington looked uncomfortable. "Of course not, Your Grace. I merely meant I understood what you meant." The Duke's voice remained calm. "But I find it interesting that society often praises honesty until an honest person says something inconvenient." The room changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. People who had been smiling began looking away. Lady Corisande's hand tightened around her fan. She had invited the Duke because his presence would improve the reputation of the gathering. She had not expected him to challenge the cruelty taking place inside it. "My lord," she said smoothly, "I fear my stepdaughter's circumstances have encouraged some unfortunate opinions about what is appropriate." The Duke looked at Evelina. "Have they?" Evelina answered carefully, "I have heard many opinions, and how many were based on truth?" That question stayed in the air, because no one wanted to answer. Not even Lady Corisande. The Duke turned slightly toward the guests. "I have visited many estates. I have seen families protect wealth titles and appearances with great dedication." He paused. "But I have rarely seen a family protect the truth with equal effort." The room fell quiet. Evelina felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, not yet. Something smaller. Hope. The first time in her life she understood that perhaps she did not have to fight every battle alone. But Lady Corisande was not finished. She approached with a gentle expression. "My lord, I hope you will forgive this family discussion. It is unpleasant to speak of private matters before guests." The Duke looked at her. Then perhaps private matters should not be turned into public humiliation. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the musicians had slowed. Lady Corisande's face remained composed, but Evelina saw it. A flicker. Fear. Only for a second. Because the Duke had not defended her out of romance. He had defended a principle. And that made him dangerous. Later that evening, after the guests had returned to their conversations, Evelina quietly left the ballroom. She needed air. She needed a moment where no one was measuring her. The corridor outside the library was dark, except for a single candle burning near the wall. As she passed the half-open door, she heard voices. She stopped. Lady Corisande, and another man. "You promised me this would be settled before the season ended," the man said. Evelina recognized the voice, her stepbrother's solicitor, Mr. Whitmore. "I said it would be handled," Lady Corisande replied. "I did not say it would be simple. You underestimate her." A pause. Then Lady Corisande answered no. "I understand her perfectly. Evelina is sentimental. She believes memory matters more than power." Evelina remained still, her heart beating harder. "She has found something," Mr. Whitmore said. Silence. Then Lady Corisande spoke more quietly. The box. Evelina felt the world narrow. They knew. They knew about the box. "She cannot prove anything," Lady Corisande continued. "And before she does, I will make certain society sees her as exactly what she appears to be." "And what is that?" "A lonely woman who believes she deserves what was never hers." Evelina stepped away before they could hear her. She did not return to her room immediately. She walked through the cold corridor carrying the words with her, not because they had hurt, she had survived worse, because now she understood. The documents were not meaningless. The fear in Lady Corisande's voice had revealed more than any confession. The box contained something powerful, something worth protecting, something worth destroying her for. That night, Evelina returned to her small chamber near the servants' wing and placed the old leather box on the table. For years she had believed she was fighting to recover what belonged to her, but she finally understood the truth. She was not searching for an inheritance. She was searching for the reason her own family had tried so hard to erase her. And inside the locked box beneath the papers her father had left behind was a second letter she had not yet opened, a letter addressed to her, written 3 days before his death, a letter that would reveal why Edmund Ashcombe had trusted his daughter with a secret he never shared with anyone else. Evelina sat beside the small wooden table in her chamber, the sound of rain against the window becoming the only thing that remained outside her thoughts. For years, she had believed her father's final days were filled only with illness and regret. Now she wondered whether he had spent those days preparing for something he knew would come after him. Her fingers moved toward the envelope. The wax seal had been broken long ago, but the paper remained carefully folded. She recognized the handwriting immediately, her father's. Not the hurried notes he sometimes left for the estate manager. Not the brief instructions written when his health had begun to fail. This was deliberate, personal. Evelina unfolded the letter. "My dearest Evelina." The first line was enough to make her stop. not because it surprised her, because it reminded her of a time when her name had been spoken with affection rather than accusation. She continued reading. Her father did not write about wealth. He did not write about titles. He wrote about responsibility. He explained that after his illness worsened, he had noticed changes in the estate accounts. He had suspected that certain people close to him were attempting to redirect decisions made years earlier, but he had not yet had enough proof to act. One sentence caught her attention. Trust the person who serves quietly for those who seek power. Rarely notice the hands that keep everything standing. Evelina read the words again. She immediately thought of Mrs. Bell, the old housekeeper who had remained silent for years, the woman who had been afraid, the woman who still remembered. The letter continued, explaining that the locked box contained only part of what he had discovered. The remaining records had been placed somewhere else, somewhere. Only someone who understood the daily workings of Ashcombe Manor would think to search. Evelina looked toward the corridor outside her room, the servants' wing, the place where Lady Corisande had sent her away because she believed it represented humiliation. But perhaps her father had known something else. Perhaps he had understood that truth sometimes survived in the places powerful people ignored. A sudden sound interrupted her thoughts. Footsteps. Evelina quickly folded the letter and placed it back inside the box. A shadow appeared beneath her door. For several moments there was only silence, then a soft knock. "Miss Evelina." She recognized Mrs. Bell's voice. She opened the door. The elderly housekeeper stood there holding a small candle, her expression troubled. "I apologize for coming so late," Mrs. Bell whispered. "But after seeing you speak with the Duke this evening, I realized something." "What is it?" Mrs. Bell glanced down the empty corridor before entering. "Your father once told me that if Lady Corisande ever discovered what was hidden, she would not search for the truth." The old woman paused. She would search for whoever could reveal it. Evelina felt the weight of the words. Not fear, not panic. Understanding. Because now she knew why Lady Corisande had tried to isolate her, why she had been moved away from the family rooms, why her reputation had been carefully damaged before she even had the chance to defend herself. It had never been about making her disappear. It had been about making certain no one would believe her if she spoke. Mrs. Bell reached into her apron and removed a small brass key. "I kept this because I promised your father I would." Evelina stared at it. "Why give it to me now?" The old woman looked toward the distant ballroom, where laughter still echoed from the guests below. "Because tonight, for the first time in 3 years, someone powerful looked at this house and saw what it truly was." Evelina closed her hand around the key. For the first time since her father's death, she did not feel like someone fighting against a wall. She felt like someone who had finally found a door. But before she could ask where the key belonged, a faint movement came from the end of the corridor. Someone else had been standing there, listening. And whoever it was, had heard enough to know that Evelina Ashcombe was no longer searching blindly. Evelina remained motionless. The corridor outside her chamber was empty again. Or at least it appeared to be. She waited several moments before stepping toward the doorway, holding the candle low so its light would not reveal her movement too quickly. The old boards beneath the carpeted floor gave a faint sound near the corner. Someone had been there. Someone had not simply passed by. Someone had stopped. Mrs. Bell closed the door quietly behind her. "We must be careful now," the housekeeper whispered. Evelina looked at the small brass key resting in her palm. Who could have been listening? Mrs. Bell hesitated, and that hesitation answered before her words did. Someone who has served this house for many years. The answer unsettled Evelina more than if the name had been spoken immediately. Because betrayal from an enemy could be expected. Betrayal from someone trusted was different. The next morning, Ashcombe Manor appeared unchanged. The fireplaces burned. The breakfast room was prepared. The servants moved silently between tables carrying dishes and fresh tea. But Evelina noticed what she had not noticed before. People were watching, not openly. Not enough for Lady Corisande to accuse them of disobedience, but enough. A glance held too long. A conversation that stopped when she entered. A servant who suddenly remembered another task. The house had always been full of whispers. Now Evelina understood that some whispers were not about her. Some were about the people afraid of her. Lady Corisande entered the breakfast room, dressed perfectly as though the previous evening had not contained the slightest moment of discomfort. She smiled at Evelina. That smile was more alarming than anger. "My dear, I hope you slept well." "I did. How fortunate." Lady Corisande poured tea. "I was concerned that the excitement of last night might have been overwhelming." Evelina watched her carefully. "You seemed concerned about many things yesterday." A brief silence followed. Only a brief one. Lady Corisande recovered quickly. "You have become sharper." "No," Evelina replied. "I have simply begun listening." The servant standing behind Lady Corisande lowered his eyes. The smallest reaction. But Evelina saw it. Lady Corisande saw it too. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of the teacup. "You should be cautious," she said softly. "Suspicion can make a person appear unreasonable, and certainty can make a person careless." This time the silence lasted longer. The room seemed to shrink around them. Then Lady Corisande laughed gently. "A performance. Nothing more. I hope your confidence does not lead you into trouble." She rose and left. Evelina waited until the door closed. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She understood the danger now. Lady Corisande was no longer merely trying to embarrass her. She was measuring how much Evelina knew. And that meant Evelina had something valuable. After breakfast, Evelina followed Mrs. Bell through the servants' corridor. It was the first time in years she had walked there without shame. The same passage Lady Corisande had chosen to remind her of her reduced position now felt different. Not smaller, hidden. The old housekeeper stopped beside a wooden cabinet near the linen room. "There is something your father wanted you to see." She unlocked the cabinet. Inside were old household records. Nothing unusual at first glance. Inventories, receipts, lists of repairs. But Mrs. Bell reached behind them and removed a thin ledger wrapped in cloth. This was not kept with the estate accounts. Why? Because your father believed anyone searching for money would ignore the records of ordinary things. Evelina opened the ledger. The pages contained names, dates, small payments. At first, they seemed meaningless. Then she noticed a pattern. Several servants who had left Ashcombe Manor after Lady Corisande arrived had received payments before departing. Not wages, not compensation, something else. Payments made quietly, payments made to remove people. Evelina looked up. She was buying silence. Mrs. Bell nodded. Not only silence. The old woman pointed to one name, a former maid. Margaret Hale. Evelina recognized it. Margaret had been her mother's maid. She had disappeared shortly after Evelina's father remarried. "I was told she left because she was ill." Mrs. Bell's expression hardened. That is what everyone was told. Evelina closed the ledger. Another piece of the truth had appeared, but it raised a more difficult question. Where was Margaret now? Before she could ask, a voice came from behind them. "You should have left old papers where they belonged." Evelina turned. Standing at the entrance was Mr. Whitmore, Lady Corisande's solicitor. His expression was polite. Too polite. Mrs. Bell immediately stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, this is the servants' corridor, I am aware." His eyes moved toward the ledger, then toward Evelina. "I came to offer advice." Evelina held the ledger closer. "I do not recall asking for it." Mr. Whitmore smiled. "That has always been your father's weakness in you. My father's weakness. He encouraged you to believe intelligence could replace position." The words were meant to wound, but they revealed something. Mr. Whitmore did not fear her because she had power. He feared her because she had knowledge. "And what do you believe?" Evelina asked. "That a woman without legal authority should be careful before challenging those who possess it." The warning was clear. Not a threat, not officially, something more acceptable in polite society. A reminder of the world she lived in. Mr. Whitmore stepped closer. "Return what you found." Evelina looked directly at him. "No." For the first time his expression changed. Only slightly. But enough, because he had expected fear. "Not refusal. I believe you misunderstand your situation." "No," Evelina said quietly. "I understand it better than I did yesterday." Mr. Whitmore left without another word. After he disappeared down the corridor, Mrs. Bell whispered, That was the first time I have seen someone refuse him. Evelina looked at the ledger. She did not feel brave. She felt afraid. But fear was no longer controlling her. For the first time in her life, she understood that courage was not the absence of fear. It was choosing what mattered more. That evening, another letter arrived at Ashcombe Manor. It was addressed to Lady Corisande. Evelina did not see its contents. But she saw the expression on her stepmother's face after reading it. The confidence was gone. And before the letter was burned in the fireplace, Evelina caught one final line. A name. Margaret Hale. The missing maid had not disappeared. Someone had been making certain she remained hidden. And now, after 3 years of silence, someone had made the mistake of reminding Evelina that the first witness against Ashcombe Manor might still be alive. The following morning, Evelina did not wait for Lady Corisande to decide what would happen next. For 3 years she had allowed others to choose the shape of her life. They had chosen where she slept, what she wore, when she was permitted to speak. But now she understood that every delay benefited only those who wanted the truth buried. With Mrs. Bell's help, Evelina prepared a small journey into the nearby village, not as an Ashcombe daughter, not as someone seeking sympathy, as someone searching for a witness. The road was covered in wet winter mud, and the cold wind pressed through the carriage windows. The village appeared unchanged from her childhood memories, yet Evelina saw it differently now. She no longer saw only the place where servants and tenants lived beneath the shadow of Ashcombe Manor. She saw the people who had carried pieces of the truth long after the family had chosen silence. Mrs. Bell led her to a modest cottage at the edge of the village. "This is where Margaret Hale was last seen before she left the estate," the old housekeeper said. Evelina looked at the small house. Then she was never ill. Mrs. Bell shook her head. No. The answer was quiet, but certain. A woman opened the door after several knocks. She was older than Evelina, remembered with tired eyes and hands marked by years of work. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then the stranger looked at Mrs. Bell. "You brought her." Evelina felt her heart tighten. "You know who I am." The woman stepped aside. "I knew your mother. I knew your father. And I knew the moment Lady Corisande entered that house that something precious had been placed in dangerous hands." Inside the cottage, the room was simple. A small fire, a wooden table, a few carefully kept belongings. Nothing like the grand rooms of Ashcombe Manor. Yet Evelina felt something there she had not felt in her own home for years. Peace. Margaret Hale sat down slowly. "I should have come forward sooner." Evelina remained standing. "Why did you not?" The woman looked toward the fire. "Because I was afraid." The same answer Mrs. Bell had given. The same answer that had protected every secret inside Ashcombe. Margaret folded her hands. "Your father discovered that Lady Corisande was moving money from the estate through accounts that did not belong to Ashcombe. He was preparing to confront her." Evelina listened carefully, and then he became ill. The words were painful. Not because they were unexpected, because they confirmed something Evelina had feared. Margaret continued. "Your father believed he had enough time to correct everything. He believed he could protect you." She looked at Evelina, but Lady Corisande understood something he did not. "What?" "That a dying man's truth is easily questioned when the people around him benefit from silence." Evelina lowered her eyes. For years, she had wondered whether her father's silence before his death meant he had failed her. Now she understood. He had not abandoned her. He had been fighting a battle she never knew existed. "Did he leave anything else?" Evelina asked. Margaret hesitated. Then she reached beneath the table and removed a small cloth-wrapped object. Evelina stared. Inside was a folded page, not the original document. "A copy. My father gave this to you, no?" Margaret looked toward the window. "He gave it to someone else. Someone he trusted to keep it safe if anything happened. Who?" The woman's expression changed. "Someone who was forced to leave Ashcombe Manor before I was." Evelina felt the pieces moving closer together. "Another witness." Margaret nodded. "But finding her will not be easy." "Why?" "Because Lady Corisande did not only remove people from the estate." She paused. "She erased their names." The words stayed with Evelina. Not because they frightened her, because they explained everything. The missing servants, The altered accounts, the whispers, the careful destruction of reputations. Lady Corisande had not simply taken control of Ashcombe Manor. She had rewritten the story of everyone who could challenge her. When Evelina returned to Ashcombe Manor that evening, the house seemed colder than before, not because the fire had weakened, because she now understood how many people had been forced to leave those walls, carrying pieces of the truth. As she entered the main corridor, she saw Lady Corisande standing near the library door, waiting. "I wondered where you had gone," her stepmother said. Evelina stopped. "I visited someone who remembered my father." Lady Corisande's expression remained calm, but her eyes changed, only slightly. "Enough. You should be careful with old memories," she said. "People often remember what benefits them. And documents?" Evelina asked. That was the wrong question. She knew it immediately, because Lady Corisande went completely still. Only for a second. But it was enough. "You have been searching through things that do not belong to you." Evelina looked at the woman who had spent years convincing everyone she was powerless. "I believe that is exactly what you wanted everyone to believe." Lady Corisande stepped closer. "You think finding a few frightened servants will change your position?" "No." Evelina held her gaze. "I think the truth will." For the first time, Lady Corisande did not answer. The silence between them carried more meaning than any argument. Because both women understood the same thing. The battle had changed. Evelina was no longer defending herself against humiliation. She was uncovering a crime of reputation, money, and inheritance. And somewhere beyond Ashcombe Manor, another missing witness was carrying the final piece of the truth. A witness Lady Corisande had spent years trying to make the world forget. Evelina did not sleep that night, not because she was afraid of Lady Corisande. Fear had been a constant companion for too long, and she had learned that fear became weaker when it was named. She remained awake because she was beginning to understand the size of the truth she had uncovered. It was not one stolen document, not one dishonest account. It was a carefully built structure of silence. A servant removed here, a letter redirected there. A reputation quietly damaged, until no one questioned why a woman had been pushed aside. By morning, Evelina had made a decision. She would stop searching for proof that Lady Corisande had acted unfairly. She would search for proof that could not be dismissed. Proof that could survive a room full of nobles. Proof that could survive the same society that had laughed when she stood alone in the ballroom. The first place she returned to was her father's library. The room had remained mostly untouched since his death. Lady Corisande rarely entered it now because she preferred places where she could control every conversation. The library was different. Books remembered, papers remembered, and sometimes forgotten corners remembered most of all. Evelina placed the brass key from Mrs. Bell into the lock of a narrow drawer hidden inside the old writing desk. The key turned. Inside was another collection of papers. Not many, just enough. A small account book, several receipts, and a folded note written by her father. This time the handwriting was weaker. The final months of his life had clearly taken their toll. Evelina unfolded it carefully. He had written about a meeting with Mr. Whitmore, a meeting that had happened before his illness became severe. Her father had suspected that the solicitor was not merely assisting Lady Corisande, he was helping her create a new version of Ashcombe affairs, one where Evelina's rights became uncertain, one where decisions could be made without her involvement, one where control of the estate would quietly move into the hands of those who knew how to manipulate the law and society. Evelina closed her eyes. The pain came suddenly, not the pain of betrayal. She had known betrayal. It was the pain of realizing how carefully her father had tried to protect her while she had believed he was simply leaving her behind. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned. Mrs. Bell stood at the doorway. "There is someone asking for you." Evelina immediately noticed the concern on the woman's face. "Who?" "The Duke of Valancrest." The answer surprised her. The Duke had no reason to visit Ashcombe Manor again. Not after the gathering, not after openly questioning Lady Corisande before her guests. Yet moments later, Evelina entered the small sitting room where he waited. The Duke stood as she entered. "I hope I am not intruding." "You are not." He studied her expression. But you appear as though you have discovered something unpleasant. Evelina almost smiled. In Ashcombe Manor, that describes most discoveries. For the first time, the Duke allowed a brief expression of amusement. Then it faded. I wanted to speak with you because I heard something concerning. Evelina remained cautious. From whom? From someone who should not have been speaking about you. She waited. The Duke continued. There are rumors spreading in the village. Her expression changed slightly. What kind of rumors? That you have become obsessed with your father's death. Evelina felt the familiar pattern immediately. Not an attack, a preparation. Lady Corisande was creating the story before Evelina could tell her own. She wants people to believe I am unstable. The Duke did not deny it. Yes. The honesty surprised her. Most gentlemen would have softened the statement. The Duke did not. And why, tell me? Because I have seen what happens when society accepts a convenient version of events without asking whether it is true. Evelina looked at him. You believe me? The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he answered, I believe that a dishonest person rarely spends years trying to prove they are honest. The words affected her more than she expected, because for years everyone had asked her to prove she was not the person Lady Corisande described. No one had asked why Lady Corisande needed that description to exist. I found evidence, Evelina said. The Duke did not move closer. He did not demand details. He simply waited, a small act, but one she noticed. She explained what she had found. The missing servants, the altered accounts, Margaret Hale, her father's letters. When she finished, the Duke looked toward the window. The difficulty is not whether the truth exists. What is it? Whether enough people will allow themselves to see it. Evelina understood. A document could be ignored. A servant could be dismissed. A woman without a husband could be called emotional. But a room full of respected people witnessing the same truth that was harder to erase. I need Margaret's statement, Evelina said. Yes, and the original accounts. Yes. And I need to find the other witness. The Duke looked back at her. You already know where to search. Evelina frowned. What do you mean, your father's letter? She remembered. The phrase, the person who serves quietly, the records of ordinary things, the people everyone ignored, not the powerful, the overlooked, the servants, the workers, the ones who saw everything because no one believed they mattered. Before the Duke left, he paused near the door. Miss Ashcombe. Yes? Last night you told Lord Harrington that limited choices do not prevent a person from making an honest one. Evelina looked at him. I remember. I believe you were mistaken. Her expression changed. About what the Duke's voice softened. Your choices are not as limited as you have been taught to believe. After he departed, Evelina stood alone in the sitting room. The words remained with her. Not because they solved anything. They did not. Lady Corisande still controlled Ashcombe Manor. Mr. Whitmore still held legal influence. The missing witness was still hidden. But something inside Evelina had changed. For the first time in her life, she was not merely trying to survive what others decided. She was deciding what came next. That afternoon, however, Lady Corisande made her own move. A formal invitation arrived. Not for Evelina, for every important family connected to Ashcombe. A winter dinner at the Manor, a gathering larger than the previous one. A gathering where Lady Corisande intended to present her version of events before Evelina had the chance to speak. And beneath the invitation, hidden among the papers delivered by the servant, was a short message. 3 words. A warning. Leave Ashcombe now. Evelina read it twice. Then she turned the paper over. There was no signature, no explanation. Only the same fear that had followed every secret inside the manor. Someone wanted her gone. But now Evelina knew something Lady Corisande had forgotten. The truth had already begun returning home. But Evelina knew that truth alone was not enough. Truth hidden in a drawer could be ignored. Truth whispered between frightened servants could be dismissed. Truth carried by a woman society had already decided was powerless could be questioned before it was even heard. It needed a place where no one could turn away. The winter dinner announced by Lady Corisande became that place. For the second time, Ashcombe Manor prepared itself for an audience. Candles were polished, tables arranged, and servants moved through the halls with the careful silence expected of a house where appearances mattered more than comfort. But this time Evelina entered the evening differently. She did not wear the grey gown chosen to make her invisible. She wore a simple dark blue dress that had belonged to her mother, carefully repaired and preserved by Mrs. Bell for years. It was not the most expensive gown in the room. It did not need to be. It carried something Lady Corisande could not purchase: a history. When Evelina entered the dining room, conversations softened. Some guests looked surprised, others looked suspicious. Lady Corisande noticed immediately. "My dear," she said with a pleasant smile, "I see you have chosen to make an impression." Evelina met her gaze. "No. I have chosen not to disappear." The answer was quiet, but several people heard it, and for the first time Lady Corisande had no immediate reply. The dinner proceeded with careful conversation. Guests discussed London society, upcoming visits and family alliances, yet beneath every polite sentence was another question. Why had the Duke defended Evelina? Why had Lady Corisande become so determined to control the story of a daughter who had once been ignored? The answer began to emerge when Mr. Whitmore arrived late. He entered carrying a leather portfolio, a small object, almost ordinary. But Evelina noticed the way Lady Corisande looked at it, not with confidence, with expectation. That was when Evelina understood. The solicitor had not come to observe. He had come to finish something. After dinner, while guests moved toward the drawing room, Evelina saw Mr. Whitmore quietly hand Lady Corisande a document. She followed them only far enough to hear their voices through the half-open library door. "We cannot allow her to speak first," Mr. Whitmore said. Lady Corisande answered sharply. "She has no proof that matters. She has enough to create questions." A pause. Then Lady Corisande lowered her voice. "Then we give society another explanation." Evelina remained still. "What explanation?" Mr. Whitmore replied, "That grief has affected her judgment, that she has become convinced of a betrayal that never occurred." The words were familiar, too familiar, not because she had heard them tonight, because she had heard them for years. Lady Corisande had not created a new weapon. She had only sharpened the one she had always used. Evelina stepped away before they could hear her, but this time she did not feel defeated, because now she knew their plan before they carried it out, and that changed everything. The following morning, Mrs. Bell brought another message, not a warning. A location. Margaret Hale had found the missing witness. Her name was Clara Whitby, a former clerk's assistant who had once copied estate records before being dismissed from Ashcombe Manor. She had not disappeared. She had been forced into silence. Evelina travelled to meet her that afternoon, accompanied by Mrs. Bell. The woman they found was older than Evelina expected, but her memory remained sharp. "I wondered if this day would come," Clara said. Evelina sat across from her. "Why did you wait?" "Because I was one woman against a family name." She looked at Evelina carefully. "But now you are no longer standing alone." Clara removed a small bundle of papers from a wooden chest. Inside were copies of entries from the estate accounts, names, payments, transfers, and one final document, a record showing that money belonging to the Ashcombe estate had been moved shortly after Edmund Ashcombe's death, not by accident, not by confusion, by instruction. Evelina looked at the signature. Her hands remained steady, because she had expected anger. What she felt instead was clarity. The person who had taken her home from her was not simply trying to gain wealth. She had been trying to make certain Evelina could never prove it. When Evelina returned to Ashcombe Manor, she placed the documents beside her father's letter. The pieces were finally connecting. The missing servants, the altered accounts, the false rumors, the attempt to destroy her reputation before she ever spoke. But one challenge remained. Lady Corisande still believed she controlled the room. She still believed society would believe the woman with the title and the estate before the daughter who had been pushed aside. She did not know that the next gathering would not be another performance of Evelina's humiliation. It would be the moment when every person who had laughed, whispered, and looked away would have to decide whether they still wished to protect a lie. And Lady Corisande had no idea that the first voice to challenge her would come from someone she had never considered important enough to fear.